Esteemed audience, in discussions, in debates, and even in personal conversations, there are those who will distort your words not by accident, but with intention. They will misrepresent you, manipulate your meaning, and craft a version of your argument that you never made. This is not a sign of their strength, but of their weakness. When someone twists your words, the first and most crucial response is to remain calm. This is not just a strategy, it is a foundation. The moment you allow anger or frustration to dictate your reaction, you have already given control to the one who seeks to manipulate you. To remain calm is to remain in command of yourself, and in doing so, you strip your opponent of their greatest weapon, the ability to provoke. When you are calm, you think clearly. Clarity is a shield against distortion, and patience the sword with which you cut through misrepresentation. The one who distorts your words often hopes for a reaction, a burst of emotion that clouds your judgment. They want you to become defensive, to feel the need to correct them in a frantic, desperate way. But when you meet their distortion with stillness, they lose their advantage. They may twist your words, but they cannot twist your mind unless you allow it. A calm mind observes rather than reacts. It notices the misrepresentation, but does not become consumed by it. Instead of rushing to correct the distortion with urgency, a composed person assesses whether it is even worth addressing. Many arguments are like fire. If you add to them with hasty words, they grow. If you take away their fuel by responding with composure, they often extinguish themselves. To stay calm is not to be indifferent, it is to be in control. Many confuse stillness with passivity, but they are not the same. Passivity is surrender, whereas calmness is mastery. A person who remains calm in the face of provocation is not weak but powerful. They see the game being played and refuse to be a pawn in it. They do not allow the other person to dictate their emotions, their pace, or their state of mind. A mind that is disturbed by misrepresentation is already at the mercy of another. The one who twists words is often more interested in how you react than in the truth of the matter. If they see that they can provoke you, they will continue. If they see that you remain unmoved, they will soon realize that their tactics are ineffective. Those who manipulate language thrive on emotional responses. When they find none, they lose interest, and their distortion loses its power. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. The wind howls, the rain pours, and the sky rages with thunder. Many people, when confronted with misrepresentation, behave like trees in the storm, shaken, bent, even uprooted. But why be a tree when you can be the mountain? The mountain does not fight the wind. It does not argue with the rain. It simply stands, unmoved, unaffected. The storm may rage, but the mountain remains. This is the mindset one must cultivate in the face of those who twist words. Calmness is also a tool for uncovering truth. When you do not allow emotions to cloud your perception, you can see the situation for what it truly is. Many times, those who distort your words are not seeking dialogue, they are seeking dominance. Their goal is not discussion but manipulation. A calm person does not rush to defend themselves unnecessarily. They see when a conversation is genuine and when it is a game. They recognize when it is time to engage and when it is time to walk away. By staying calm, you also create discomfort in the one who distorts your words. They expect you to react, to become emotional, to lose your composure. When you do not, they are forced to confront their own actions. Many people who twist words rely on their opponent's emotional reaction to further twist the conversation. When you refuse to provide that reaction, they find themselves standing on unstable ground. They may try harder at first, pushing further, trying to get under your skin. But if they continue to meet only calm, measured responses, they eventually lose momentum. A calm response also gives you credibility. People are more likely to trust the one who remains composed over the one who lashes out. When you meet misrepresentation with poise, you demonstrate confidence in your position. You show that you do not need to defend yourself with aggression, because the truth is enough. Others observing the conversation will see who is reasonable and who is playing games. In this way, calmness is not just a shield but a statement. It tells the world that you are not easily manipulated, that you are grounded in reason, and that you are not controlled by the distortions of others. Furthermore, remaining calm protects your own well-being. Engaging in heated arguments, Allowing yourself to be dragged into an emotional battle only drains your energy. The more you react to misrepresentation, the more you allow it to affect you. But when you stay calm, you preserve your mental clarity and emotional stability. You do not let someone else's distortion dictate your state of your mind. This is not only beneficial in the moment, but in the long term. A person who practices calmness in conversation will find that they carry this skill into all areas of life. The ability to remain calm in the face of misrepresentation is a discipline, and like any discipline, it requires practice. It is not something that happens instantly, but something cultivated over time. The next time someone twists your words, resist the instinct to react impulsively. Instead, take a breath, observe the situation, and choose how you respond. If you can master your emotions, you can master the conversation. And if you can master the conversation, you can master the outcome. In the end, the greatest power is not found in the loudest voice, the sharpest retort, or the most aggressive defense. It is found in the one who remains composed, who does not allow themselves to be thrown off balance. To stay calm is to stay in control. To stay calm is to be untouchable. When faced with someone who twists your words, one of the most effective ways to respond is by asking for clarity. This approach is not about winning an argument in a direct or aggressive way, but about exposing distortion through calm and deliberate questioning. Those who manipulate words often rely on ambiguity and assumptions. By asking them to explain their interpretation, you force them to either justify their distortion or reveal their dishonesty. In either case, the act of questioning puts you in control of the conversation and denies them the reaction they seek. Asking for clarity is a simple but powerful tool. Instead of immediately correcting the misrepresentation, you can respond by asking, "That is not what I meant. Can you explain how you arrived at that interpretation?" This forces the other person to either provide a reasonable explanation, giving you the opportunity to correct them in a measured way, or to reveal that their misrepresentation is deliberate. Many who twist words do so in a way that assumes their version of events will not be challenged. When you calmly ask for clarity, you disrupt their strategy. A key advantage of seeking clarity is that it keeps the conversation focused on the actual content of the discussion rather than emotional reactions. When someone distorts your position, it is tempting to respond with frustration, denying their claim outright or accusing them of twisting your words. However, this often leads to an unproductive back and forth where they continue to reframe the discussion on their terms. Instead, by questioning them, you shift the burden of explanation onto them. If their interpretation is flawed or dishonest, this will become obvious. If their misunderstanding is genuine, then a clear conversation can follow. People who manipulate language often rely on vagueness. They will take what you said and subtly change its meaning, often in a way that makes it seem as if they are responding to your argument while actually avoiding it. By asking for clarification, you force them to make their distortion explicit. If they claim, for example, "So what you're saying is that you don't care about the issue at all," when that is not what you said, you can respond by asking, "What made you think that? Can you point to what I said that led you to that conclusion?" This puts them in a difficult position. If they are acting in good faith, they will have to reconsider their assumption. If they are acting in bad faith, they will struggle to justify their misrepresentation without exposing their manipulation. One of the most effective techniques when asking for clarity is to remain as neutral as possible. It is easy to detect when someone is distorting your words, and it is natural to feel frustrated by it. But if your question is loaded with frustration or accusation, they may deflect by focusing on your tone instead of the content of the discussion. By asking calmly and genuinely, you give them no escape route. If they attempt to shift the conversation by claiming that you are being defensive or aggressive, you can simply repeat the question, "I'm just trying to understand. Can you explain how you interpreted what I said in that way?" This forces them to engage with your words, rather than hiding behind emotional deflections. Another important benefit of asking for clarity is that it slows down the conversation. People who twist words often rely on keeping the conversation moving quickly, making claims that require immediate correction, then shifting again before any real examination can take place. By stopping and asking for an explanation, You take control of the pace. You refuse to let them set the tempo of the discussion, ensuring that each point is properly addressed before moving forward. This makes it much harder for them to continue manipulating the conversation, as their distortions are now under scrutiny instead of simply being thrown into the discussion unchallenged. Asking for clarity also helps uncover underlying assumptions and biases. Sometimes people twist words not out of malice, but because they are viewing the conversation through their own preconceived ideas. When you ask them to explain their interpretation, it forces them to articulate the assumptions they are making. They may not even realize how they are distorting your words until they are made to explain their reasoning. This can create an opportunity for a more productive discussion rather than a defensive argument. It is also important to remember that not every person who twists your words is doing so with bad intentions. Some misunderstand simply because they are listening with preconceived notions, assuming they already know what you mean rather than truly engaging with your words. By asking for clarity, you give them a chance to correct their own misunderstanding without confrontation. You turn the conversation into a cooperative search for understanding rather than a battle of corrections and counter-arguments. This approach is particularly useful in public debates or discussions where others are watching. If someone misrepresents your position in front of an audience, a direct denial may seem defensive, even if it is justified. But if you respond by calmly asking them to explain how they reach that conclusion, you appear composed and rational while they are forced to either justify or retract their claim. Those watching the conversation will see who is acting in good faith and who is distorting the discussion. This can be a powerful way to maintain credibility and demonstrate intellectual integrity. Asking for clarity is not about playing games or using rhetorical tricks. It is about keeping the conversation honest and making sure that your words are not unfairly manipulated. It is about refusing to let someone else dictate the terms of the discussion through misrepresentation. When done correctly, it removes the power of those who seek to twist language to their advantage. The practice of seeking clarity requires patience. There will be times when people continue to dodge the question or refuse to engage honestly. In those cases, it becomes clear that they are not interested in understanding but in misrepresenting. Even then, the act of asking for clarity serves a purpose. It exposes those who argue dishonestly. When someone refuses to explain their interpretation, it becomes obvious that their distortion is intentional. At that point, you can decide whether to continue engaging or to simply move on, knowing that you have done your part in seeking truth rather than conflict. In any discussion, clarity is essential. It keeps conversations grounded in reality and prevents manipulation. By calmly and consistently asking others to explain how they reach their interpretation, you take control of the conversation, remove ambiguity, and ensure that your words are not twisted without challenge. It is a skill that not only helps in argument, but in all areas of communication, creating dialogue that is based on understanding rather than distortion. When someone twists your words, one of the most effective ways to respond is by calmly and precisely restating your original point. This is not an act of repetition for its own sake, but a method of keeping the conversation anchored in truth, rather than allowing it to drift into distortion. When people manipulate words, they often try to force a shift in meaning, making it seem as though you said something different from what you intended. If you engage with their misrepresentation, directly defending yourself against an argument you never made, you allow them to dictate the terms of the discussion. Instead, the best response is to bring the conversation back to what was actually said, reinforcing your position with clarity and consistency. Restating your original point is a way of reclaiming control. It sends a clear message: you will not be pulled into a debate over something you never claimed. When someone says, "So you're saying X and X are not what you said," the instinctive response is often to say, "No, that's not what I meant," and then explain why. But a more effective response is to simply restate what you actually said. Instead of engaging with their distortion, you return to your foundation. For example, if you made a nuanced statement about a complex issue, and they attempt to reframe it in an extreme or oversimplified way, you do not need to argue about their misrepresentation. You simply repeat your original point as clearly as possible. By doing this, you prevent them from shifting the discussion away from what you actually meant. This method works because it denies them the ability to create a false narrative. People who twist words often rely on subtle changes in phrasing to steer a conversation in their favor. They might slightly exaggerate, omit key details, or frame your statement in a way that makes it easier to attack. If you spend time refuting every aspect of their misrepresentation, you may find yourself arguing against something you never said. Instead, when confronted with distortion, a simple and direct restatement of your position keeps the discussion honest. Moreover, repetition with precision reinforces understanding. People often assume that once they have said something, it has been fully grasped by their audience. But this is rarely the case, especially in discussions where emotions or preconceived biases are at play. When an opponent distorts your words, it is often because they are listening with the intent to respond rather than to understand. By calmly and clearly restating your point, you increase the likelihood that your actual meaning is recognized. It may not convince the person twisting your words, but it may help those listening to the discussion see the truth more clearly. Restating your original point is also a powerful way to demonstrate confidence in your argument. When people become defensive, they often appear unsure, even if they are correct. This is one of the psychological advantages that manipulators seek. They want to put you in a position where you feel the need to defend yourself against an accusation, making it seem as if you are backtracking. But when you simply restate your original point without getting drawn into emotional defensiveness, you show that you are not shaken by their tactics. You stand firm in what you said, and this quiet confidence can be more persuasive than any aggressive counterargument. Another advantage of restating your original point is that it forces the other person to deal with what was actually said, rather than their preferred distortion. If they continue to misrepresent your words, they will appear increasingly dishonest or incapable of addressing your actual argument. When someone repeatedly returns to their original point, it becomes clear who is grounded in reason and who is attempting to manipulate the discussion. Over time, this approach exposes those who argue in bad faith. This strategy is particularly effective in public discussions, where others are watching and forming their own judgments about who is being honest and who is distorting the conversation. When someone twists your words in front of an audience, the instinctive reaction might be to refute their claim directly, explaining why they are wrong. But in doing so, you allow them to control the narrative. A better approach is to return to your original statement and reinforce it with unwavering clarity. The more you stay anchored in your actual words, the less room they have to twist them. It is also important to recognize that not everyone who misrepresents your words is doing so with malicious intent. Some people misunderstand because they are interpreting through the lens of their own experiences, assumptions, or biases. In these cases, restating your original point is not just a defensive strategy, but a way to facilitate genuine understanding. By reiterating your position calmly and clearly, you give the other person an opportunity to engage with what you actually mean rather than what they initially assumed you meant. In conversations where emotions run high, restating your original point can also serve as a way to de-escalate tension. When discussions become heated, people often speak past each other, each party becoming more focused on responding than on truly listening. By pausing and carefully restating your position, you slow down the conversation and bring it back to a rational foundation. This can help reset the tone of the discussion, making it more productive rather than reactive. Another key aspect of this technique is avoiding unnecessary embellishment. When restating your original point, it is crucial to keep it as close to the original wording as possible. Adding extra explanations or defensiveness can sometimes give the impression that you are changing your stance. A clear, simple restatement is far more effective than a lengthy justification. If the person distorting your words challenges you again, you can calmly repeat your point without engaging in their attempts to drag you into a defensive posture. Over time, the practice of restating your original point becomes a natural habit, allowing you to navigate difficult conversations with composure. It shifts the focus from reacting to controlling the flow of the discussion. Instead of being drawn into emotional or manipulative exchanges, you become an anchor of stability, ensuring that the conversation remains grounded in what was actually said. In any discussion, especially those where someone is intentionally misrepresenting your words, the best response is not always to argue or refute, but to simply reinforce what you actually meant. By doing this with patience and consistency, you ensure that your position remains clear, that you do not get pulled into defending a mischaracterization, and that the discussion remains centered on truth rather than distortion. When faced with someone who twists your words, one of the most important principles to uphold is to avoid personal attacks. Engaging in personal insults or attacks may feel like a natural response when someone is distorting your statements, but it ultimately weakens your position, clouds your judgment, and diverts the conversation away from the actual issue. Instead of proving your point, it gives the other person an opportunity to shift the focus from their misrepresentation to your emotional reaction. Maintaining a rational, composed stance allows you to retain credibility and control over the discussion, ensuring that the conversation remains productive and focused on truth. When people manipulate words, it is often an attempt to provoke a reaction. They may deliberately distort what you said to make you seem unreasonable, insensitive, or uninformed. This tactic is designed to frustrate you, leading you to respond emotionally rather than logically. If you fall into the trap of attacking them personally, calling them dishonest, ignorant, or malicious, it only confirms their strategy was effective. Instead of engaging in name-calling or attacking their character, the best response is to remain composed and redirect the conversation back to the substance of your argument. Avoiding personal attacks does not mean allowing others to walk over you or ignoring their misrepresentation. It means addressing the issue with discipline and focus, rather than resorting to hostility. If someone twists your words, instead of saying, "You're deliberately lying about what I said," you can calmly state, "That's not what I meant. Let me clarify my original point." This keeps the conversation centered on your argument, rather than turning it into a battle of egos. If they persist in misrepresenting you, simply reiterate your stance, without getting drawn into their attempt to make the discussion personal. A crucial reason to avoid personal attacks is that they provide your opponent with an easy way to evade the argument. Once the discussion turns personal, they no longer need to defend their misrepresentation. They can now accuse you of being aggressive, rude, or unreasonable. This allows them to escape scrutiny, as the focus shifts from their distortion of your words to your perceived honesty. Even if they were the ones who initially misrepresented you, they can claim the moral high ground if you respond with insults or personal jabs. By staying calm and refusing to engage in personal attacks, you deny them this opportunity. Another key advantage of maintaining a composed approach is that it enhances your credibility. In any argument, whether in private conversation or public debate, observers are often forming opinions based not just on the content of what is said, but also on the behavior of those involved. If one person remains calm and focused on the issue while the other resorts to personal attacks, it is usually clear who is acting in good faith. By choosing to engage with the argument itself rather than attacking the person making it, you demonstrate intellectual integrity and self-discipline. When emotions run high, it is easy to believe that a personal attack is justified. If someone repeatedly twists your words, it may feel like they deserve to be called out harshly. However, even if your frustration is warranted, a personal attack does not strengthen your argument. In fact, it often has the opposite effect. The moment an argument turns into personal hostility, rational discussion is lost. Instead of persuading others or proving the misrepresentation wrong, the conversation descends into defensiveness and hostility, making it nearly impossible to resolve the issue in a meaningful way. One effective way to avoid personal attacks while still addressing bad behavior is to focus on actions rather than character. Instead of saying "you're a liar," you can say, "What you just said is not accurate." Instead of accusing someone of being manipulative, you can say, "That misrepresents what I actually meant." This keeps the discussion centered on specific behavior, rather than making broad statements about the other person's character. Even if they are intentionally distorting your words, responding in a measured way allows you to keep the upper hand. It is also important to recognize that resorting to personal attacks often damages your own ability to think clearly. When you engage in name-calling or hostility, your focus shifts from rational analysis to emotional reaction. This makes it easier for your opponent to manipulate the conversation further, as they now have the advantage of controlling your emotional state. By maintaining composure and avoiding personal attacks, you preserve your ability to think logically, respond effectively, and stay in control of the discussion. A common tactic of those who twist words is to provoke their opponent into anger so that they can then claim victimhood. If you allow yourself to be drawn into personal insults, they can now portray you as the unreasonable one, even if they were the ones who distorted your words first. This is why maintaining a calm, respectful approach, even when faced with deliberate misrepresentation, is often the most effective strategy. It denies them the ability to manipulate the conversation in their favor. Furthermore, avoiding personal attacks helps ensure that you are arguing for the right reasons. The goal of a discussion should not be to simply win at any cost, but to seek truth and understanding. Even if the person you are arguing with is being dishonest, the best way to expose that dishonesty is through reason and clarity, not through personal insults. By staying focused on the argument rather than attacking the person, you reinforce the idea that you are engaging in the discussion for the sake of truth rather than personal victory. In moments of frustration, it can be helpful to remind yourself that personal attacks are rarely productive. If your goal is to correct misrepresentation and communicate your point effectively, then maintaining a composed and respectful approach will always be more persuasive than resorting to hostility. Even if the other person does not change their behavior, your measured response will be evident to anyone observing the conversation, reinforcing the strength of your position. Ultimately, avoiding personal attacks is not about being passive or avoiding confrontation. It is about responding in a way that maximizes your effectiveness. It is about staying focused on your argument, refusing to be manipulated into an emotional reaction, and maintaining the credibility needed to be persuasive. By choosing to engage with logic rather than hostility, you ensure that the conversation remains centered on what truly matters, the search for truth and understanding. Recognizing when to disengage is one of the most crucial skills in any argument, especially when dealing with someone who twists your words. While it is natural to want to correct misrepresentations and defend yourself against distortions, not every argument is worth continuing. Some people engage in discussions with the genuine intention of understanding, while others manipulate conversations for personal gain, to provoke reactions, or to win at any cost. When you identify that a conversation is no longer productive, the best response is often to walk away rather than wasting energy on an argument that leads nowhere. One of the key signs that it is time to disengage is when the other person repeatedly misrepresents your words, even after you have clarified your point multiple times. A misunderstanding can happen in any conversation, and it is reasonable to provide explanations to ensure that your meaning is clear. However, when someone continues to twist what you say despite your efforts to clarify, it is likely that they are not arguing in good faith. At this point, engaging further serves no purpose because their goal is not to seek truth but to control the narrative. Instead of falling into their trap, recognizing their tactics and stepping away is the wiser course of action. Another indicator that disengagement is necessary is when the conversation turns into a cycle of emotional manipulation rather than rational discussion. Some people argue not to exchange ideas but to provoke frustration, anger, or defensiveness in others. They may deliberately make inflammatory statements, shift goalposts, or ignore direct responses in an attempt to make you react emotionally. When you notice that an argument is no longer about ideas but about emotional dominance, continuing to engage only plays into their hands. By refusing to participate further, you take away their ability to manipulate the situation and maintain control over your own emotions. It is also important to recognize when an argument has reached a standstill. Some discussions reach a point where both parties have stated their positions clearly, and no further progress is being made. If you find yourself repeating the same points without any meaningful change in the conversation, it is a strong indication that disengagement is the best option. There is no rule that says every disagreement must be resolved. Some discussions will always end with both sides maintaining their original perspectives. In these cases, knowing when to stop is a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. Disengagement is particularly necessary when the argument is having a negative impact on your mental well-being. Some discussions, especially those involving personal values, beliefs, or experiences, can become emotionally exhausting. If you find yourself feeling drained, anxious, or frustrated long after the conversation has ended, it may not be worth continuing. Your energy and peace of mind are valuable, and engaging in endless debates with people who are unwilling to listen or understand can take a significant toll. Recognizing when to prioritize your well-being over winning an argument is an essential skill. In some cases, walking away from an argument is not just about protecting yourself, but also about denying the other person the attention or reaction they seek. Some individuals thrive on conflict, deliberately twisting words and making extreme statements to provoke a strong emotional response. They may not even believe in what they are saying, but are simply looking for entertainment or validation. Engaging with such individuals only rewards their behavior and encourages them to continue. The best way to handle these situations is to refuse to give them what they want by disengaging entirely. There is also a practical benefit to knowing when to disengage. It allows you to direct your energy toward more productive discussions. Not every argument is worth having, and time spent arguing with someone who refuses to listen is time taken away from meaningful conversations with those who are open to discussion. If your goal is to influence opinions or create change, your energy is best used on discussions where there is a genuine chance of understanding, rather than wasting it on those who are determined to misrepresent you. Recognizing when to disengage does not mean you are admitting defeat. Some people stay in arguments longer than they should because they fear that walking away will make them look weak or as if they have no response. In reality, disengaging from an unproductive conversation is a sign of strength. It shows that you value your time, energy, and peace of mind enough to refuse to engage in endless, pointless debates. It also prevents the other person from controlling the narrative by keeping you trapped in a cycle of misrepresentation. A good way to disengage effectively is to do so with composure and finality. Instead of becoming frustrated or defensive, you can simply state, "I've explained my point clearly, and I don't think this conversation is going anywhere productive. I'm going to step away now." This approach prevents further escalation while making it clear that you are choosing to leave on your own terms. If the other person tries to pull you back into the discussion, the best response is silence. Walking away is most effective when you do not allow yourself to be drawn back in. In situations where disengagement is necessary but social or professional settings make it difficult to leave completely, setting boundaries is a useful alternative. You can make it clear that you are not interested in continuing the discussion and that you prefer to focus on more constructive topics. For example, if a coworker persistently misrepresents your words in meetings, you can say, "I don't think we're going to agree on this, so let's move on to the next point." This allows you to disengage without outright walking away while still maintaining control over the situation. Ultimately, the ability to recognize when to disengage is a valuable skill that helps maintain clarity, emotional stability, and focus. Arguments that are built on misrepresentation, bad faith, or manipulation rarely lead to productive outcomes. Instead of wasting energy on trying to convince someone who refuses to listen, knowing when to step away allows you to invest your time in discussions that matter. Walking away is not an admission of defeat, but a conscious choice to protect your peace and prioritize meaningful conversations over endless disputes. When engaging in an argument, especially with someone who twists your words, one of the most important things to remember is not to seek validation from them or from others. The need for approval can often weaken your position and make you more vulnerable to manipulation. When you argue with someone who distorts your statements, they may attempt to make you feel as though your perspective is invalid, forcing you into a position where you feel the need to prove yourself. This is a trap that can take your focus away from the actual discussion and shift it toward gaining their acceptance, which is neither necessary nor beneficial. When people seek validation in an argument, they often unconsciously adjust their words and tone in an effort to win approval. This can lead to unnecessary compromises, self-doubt, or even altering one's position just to avoid criticism. The problem with this approach is that it gives the other person control over the conversation. If they know that you are looking for validation, they can use that as leverage to manipulate your stance, making you feel as if you must change your words or agree with them in order to be accepted. Instead of arguing for the sake of truth, you may end up arguing for the sake of approval, which weakens the integrity of your position. Validation seeking can also make you more reactive rather than strategic in your approach. If you are too concerned with being seen as right in the eyes of the other person or an audience, you might focus more on defending yourself emotionally rather than making logical, well-structured arguments. This can make you more likely to fall into defensive patterns, over-explaining yourself or becoming frustrated when the other person refuses to acknowledge your points. When someone is twisting your words, they are already demonstrating that they are not engaging in the discussion in good faith. Expecting them to validate your position is unrealistic and will only lead to further frustration. Another reason to avoid seeking validation is that it can make you vulnerable to the opinions of those who are not even arguing in good faith. People who deliberately distort your words do so because they want to put you on the defensive. They may use tactics such as strawman arguments, misrepresentations, or outright lies to make you feel as though your position is weak. If you fall into the trap of seeking their approval or trying too hard to convince them, you are giving them exactly what they want: control over the conversation. Instead, it is better to remain firm in your stance and recognize that their refusal to acknowledge your point does not make it any less valid. It is also important to remember that confidence in your argument does not come from external validation, but from internal certainty. If you have done your research, thought carefully about your position, and expressed yourself clearly, then you do not need someone else to confirm that you are right. Seeking validation from others often leads to self-doubt, especially when dealing with someone who deliberately misrepresents your words. Instead of questioning yourself just because they refuse to acknowledge your perspective, remind yourself that their opinion does not define the strength of your argument. In many cases, people who twist words are not interested in a fair discussion. They are more interested in maintaining control or appearing dominant. If you allow yourself to seek their approval, you are giving them power over your sense of self-assurance. By detaching from the need for validation, you can focus on making your points clearly and logically, rather than worrying about whether they will agree with you or acknowledge your reasoning. This allows you to stay centered and maintain composure even when faced with deliberate misrepresentation. Another downside of seeking validation is that it often leads to frustration and exhaustion. If you are constantly trying to get someone to admit that you are right, you may find yourself stuck in an endless cycle of repeating and explaining yourself, only to be met with continued resistance. This is especially true when arguing with someone who has no intention of understanding you in the first place. Instead of expending energy trying to gain their validation, it is often more productive to simply state your position clearly, address misrepresentations once, and move on without feeling the need to convince them. In discussions, especially those involving complex or controversial topics, it is rare to receive universal agreement or validation. Even the most well-reasoned arguments can be dismissed by those who are unwilling to listen. Accepting this reality allows you to engage in discussions with a stronger mindset, where your focus remains on presenting your argument rather than persuading those who refuse to engage honestly. It is far more powerful to stand by your words with quiet confidence than to constantly seek acknowledgement from others. Ultimately, not seeking validation means trusting yourself. It means recognizing that your worth and intelligence are not determined by whether someone else agrees with you. It means understanding that arguments are about exchanging ideas, not about winning approval. When you detach from the need for validation, you free yourself from unnecessary emotional investment in the outcome of the discussion. You become more focused, composed, and resilient, making it much harder for anyone to manipulate or undermine you. In the end, the strength of your argument does not come from whether others validate it, but from your own confidence in its truth. Seeking approval from those who twist your words only gives them power over you, distracting you from the real purpose of the discussion. Instead of chasing acknowledgement, stand firm in your reasoning, trust in your own clarity, and refuse to be drawn into a battle for validation. True conviction does not waver in the face of misrepresentation. It remains steady, unshaken, and independent of the approval of others.